70s, particularly Mary. Yeah, I just.
So sorry, I'm going to start recording because Michelle requested that we record the Q&A, Ariel, if that's okay with you.
So I'm lost. What are we doing now?
So I'm recording this Q&A. I'm recording all of this interaction. Michelle requested that we do this. So yeah. If that's all right with you.
Yeah. So do you want me to just go back to where I started? Or
if you could, that would be fantastic. Yes, just to have it all.
Okay. So Michelle asked to talk more about holding labour. It emerged in the failure of gender literacy in my debates with deep ecologists who were reconstituting the social relation with nature, the human relation with nature, but in a totally masculinist way. As somebody, I think a woman philosopher whose name I forget, said at the time, the male subject proceeds on the basis that he is autonomous and self-creating and totally oblivious to his dependency on the activities of the feminine subject in society. And then we see that again in the Marxist radicalism, where the emphasis is totally on productive labor, largely the sphere of men until recently, and the reproductive labor that women do, which makes productive capitalism possible, was totally unrecognized as a form of labor, and therefore as having revolutionary potential. So, and some of you will have been reading, I'm sure, some of the socialist feminists from the 1970s, and particularly Maria Rosa Dalla Costa and Selma James, who argued that women's domestic labor warrants inclusion in the re-theorization of Marxism, and that it even makes the generation of surplus value in capitalism possible. I mean, it's an absolutely quintessential part of the economy. Anyway, as ecological feminists go, we are really not concerned. We are looking to create a different world in which the capitalist economy will not feature so oppressively. So as I was saying, it has that holding, has that kind of genesis out of the notion of reproductive labor. But then again, when you're looking at the decolonial context and the work which Indigenous peoples and peasants in Global South are doing, it's regenerative labor. And very much the same principles are involved in that life-affirming labor as in the labor of mothers and caregivers, or fathers for that matter, and as caregivers. So I was concerned to unpack that and to understand more about it and to make it the basis of our reconstituted relationship with nature. And so towards the end of the little chat with Mary there, I did read out some what I saw as key features of holding labor. And you can read about these. Most of this stuff is the features themselves are spelled out in the last chapter of the eco-sufficiency book, which is basically a chapter engaging with ecological economists, trying to shake them up a bit. And the stuff arguing for the notion of a meta-industrial labor and a meta-industrial class is already in the 1997 book. I think it's called Towards a Barefoot Epistemology or something like that. Did that help, Michelle?
That's tremendous. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself here. Yeah, no, that's tremendous. Hi. Thanks so much for that. I'll leave the floor for others to ask questions, Ariel.
Can I ask, is this mainly an honours class or master's or PhD? What level are we at the moment?
No, Ariel, this is the philosophy seminar, the Friday philosophy seminar. So
it's mixed.
It's very mixed.
Very mixed. Yeah.
By the way, I have linked the recording of the conversation in the chat, so I have put the link there for any of you that might want to watch it later as well, or that got here late for some reason. So you're welcome to go and check it out at Ariel's website. So any more questions, anyone? Interventions, comments? All right, so we can go to Christy then. Christy, please go ahead.
Hello, Ariel. I'm a casual lecturer in the program here. And I have been, having a go for some years now at trying to represent both the deep ecologist and also some ecofeminist views in my classes. And I've just been dealing with a quotation from Val Plumwood in my class this semester. I thought that I might share it with you since you've raised this relationship between the deep ecologist and your ecofeminist perspective. And maybe you can help me understand it a bit better. I'm sort of just interested in doing justice to these views. So if I could just share with you this quote that is from Val Plumwood, but it's presented in this chapter as a concern she has about the work of deep ecologists such as Arnie Ness. And what she says is that
Christy, can I just ask you the date of that Plumwood piece?
Well, I'm just looking at the reference now. It's 1993.
Okay.
So I can actually, maybe I'll put in the chat after where it actually comes from. I've just only got the quote on my screen at the moment, but I can follow that up. So she says, let's see. I'm not going to directly quote all of it, but she's concerned about the emphasis in the deep ecologist work about identifying with nature, or with the identification of us with nature. Are you okay, Calvin? Are you trying to say something? Okay, so her concern seems to be that the distinctness and independence from us and the distinctness of the needs of things in nature from our things. Like she's claiming that, of course, we do have to recognize the distinctness of things in nature from ourselves. Otherwise, we run the risk of sort of arrogantly assuming that we're, in being so identified with nature, we understand it and we act in solidarity with it. But there's concerning ethical implications if, that sort of idea that we're so identified with nature that we, in fact, have the same view, or we haven't, kind of a good understanding of the other. So she seems to be concerned that there, and it seems a similar concern to the one you just described, in that, it's a sort of maybe a subsuming, it might be actually what's going on when what you're imagining is that you're actually trying to just be identified with nature. Yeah. So she seemed in this quote to actually sort of to definitely presuppose a kind of distinctness between my perspective and, what's around me in nature. But at the same time, she's also concerned about this, sort of dichotomy between the human and the natural. So I thought that I was wondering if you could just help me understand a bit better, maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's two different categories you've got on the table there, or Val had on the table. I think her objection to let me start with this. I'll start the other way around. It reminds me very much of, I'm not aware of her objecting to this in Arnie Ness. I did it in 1984 already and used a phrase something like a grim determination to fuse with nature or whatever, because there were a lot of contradictions in the initial statement by Arnie Ness and Bill DeVal there back in the early 80s. But I'm very aware of, so in other words, a grim determination to build this new identity, right? But she particularly goes to town, I think, on Warwick Fox. I'm pretty sure it's Val, who has this transcendental or transcendent subjectivity or something. And she actually sees it as just a swollen masculine ego, which is, you know, which is really quite problematic and symptomatic of the whole dilemma. But to get back to the idea, there are, at the same time, she's talking about, she's holding on to humanism, I think, and clearly we have to be able to make a distinction between humanity and nature if we are discussing these things, because our culture does, and if we are making political change in our culture, we have to use the terms which are available to us in order to deconstruct the problems. Okay, so that's one category of usage of humanity and nature. You need the dualism there as a tool. It's a logical, conceptual difference, right? But that's a different usage of the humanity nature, different category of, different kettle of fish, if you like, from wanting to affirm that humanity is literally nature in embodied form. Okay, so you're looking at two different orders of argument, two different categories of argument. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, it seems, I mean, just tell me if this is what you're saying. It sounds to me like you're saying that there's a kind of, you know, on the one hand, we're talking about sort of what we are, what we're made of.
Yeah, which is the second one,
yes, second one, yeah.
Humans as nature in embodied form, yeah.
And on the other hand, maybe you're talking about a conceptual distinction for the purposes of trying to express ideas.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm wondering if that's kind of connected to some of the comments that you and also Mary were discussing about epistemology or logic.
Yes. It's important,
you know, we might be forced
to distinguish between an ideological dualism, such as humanity versus nature, masculinity versus femininity, etc., which are mythologies used to oppress people, traditional ideologies, versus a conceptual binary which enables us to analyze a problem. So a conceptual binary is not the same thing as an ideological dualism.
Yes, okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
All right.
Hi, so I guess that Mary is also here.
Mary has just joined, yes.
Okay,
welcome, Mary.
Hello. I got a bit mixed up. There,
Mary,
there we are. Yes. Hello.
Show your picture, Mary.
Ah, right.
Ah, there you are.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello. How are you?
All right.
Sorry to be late.
I have a question for Mary. Am I allowed?
Yeah, of course. Anyone is allowed. It's a completely libertarian room. You go ahead.
And I'll show you all the notes I took. Oh, you can't read it. I've got a page covered with scribble from everything she said today, which I'm going to have to sort it out. Well, there are actually two things. One brief comment on your delightful description of the traditional way of governance, which always had a man leader and a woman leader. Mary, can you hear me there?
Yes, love. Yeah, gendered governance.
And I thought how lovely that is. It resonates with when I used to be a psychology student and looking at group work. Mm-hmm. And one of the principles was that in a group activity, the participants are always much more comfortable and tuned in if there is a man and a woman leader, and it's to do with the dynamic of parenting.
All right, okay, yeah, could be that too.
That unconsciously they feel supported at a very deep emotional level. Anyway, that was just to maybe comments.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I need to understand more from your work is your distinction between a civilizational culture and a civilizational state.
Yes.
The use of this word state, which left me floundering there.
Well, a state, as I understand it, not just a nation state, but way, way back, you know, ancient states I'm talking about, when they started off being hierarchical and so on.
Right.
When I say ancient, I mean like, you know, Egyptian, Chinese, all of them, especially when large-scale agriculture started. And then not soon after that, not long after that, I should say, people started to compete. Serious competition starts. And of course, you know, a hierarchy starts too at the same time, because in a competition, a competitive ethos starts, and it comes out of, because of warring conflict between two different groups who want to control good land and the approaches to good land and other people's country and so on and so on. So you end up with survivalist ethos, which turns into a competitive ethos. And so you end up with a hierarchy of powerful, you know, great power, accumulation of wealth, accumulation of control over the management of resources, whereas Aboriginal people never went in for competing over resources. It's a shared a custodial ethic, you see. You're supposed to collaborate with each other, have a stewardship system, and so on. And it's to do with trying to have a stable, secure place, not insecure. Not you know, you don't go for anything that goes against security for everyone. So that's how they approach it, like that. So it just never ended up, Aboriginal ideas, you know, governance didn't end up with the idea of a state, where it was really what it was a self-regulating society based on essentially that idea. I think I mentioned it, a sacralized ecological collaborative stewardship system across the whole country. So no hierarchy, a flat system. And the thing is, you've got to work harder at that. It's very easy to have it seems like, when I've been looking at history, all ancient history and all the recent stuff, it's easier in a way to get things done with a hierarchy, because, you know, different levels, ranks, class systems, caste systems, one system just tells the other below them what to do and so on. But the big thing is, it's held up, it's kept in place by powerful forces.
So
it's coercive, you see. So a self-regulating system doesn't rely on coercion. You're supposed to be a lawful person anyway, you see. So that's the self-regulating part.
Okay, your whole description then of what constitutes a state and how the state emerged is a masculinist concept.
It seems like it. It seems like it's mainly male oriented. I know there were and are queens and so on, but really it's a very very masculine, I suppose.
Could you say more about how it's why you agree that it's masculine?
Well, one way I'd start to explain it is in the metaphysics, I guess. Many different groups across the country see the sun as a female. The sun is female and the moon is male, actually. Both of them have energy, but the sun has probably more energy than anything. And while it's recognized that they're unequal, it wouldn't matter if you saw them the other way around, actually, but it's unequal, that's the main thing. But they have to be in balance. They are in balance despite being unequal. They are in balance, and you have to have balance, because otherwise the whole system, Earth, with the sun and moon, it's insecure, isn't it? It won't last long. You've got to have a balance between male and female. It helps with security and stability. So you could see it from that old stories like that, old dreaming stories about the cosmos, you know. But the other thing too is that the life of women's lives are seen as incredibly valuable. It's not just what men do, you know, and their lives that are somehow outrank women's. They're both on this balanced, and you can't have a stable society without that balance, you know. It's all about balance, governance, gendered balance. And when just a few years ago, or in the last decade, we had an idea of where Aboriginal people came up with ideas of cultural, political representation. So, and this is Aboriginal people, not the government making up the system, designing the system, really. No co-design here, just Aboriginal. And they wanted to put back in place our own old systems, you see. So we had the idea of male and female governance. So the chambers, that kind of structure, the chambers, 3 of them, were all made up of about 20 men, 20 women. And all throughout those chambers and other sectors in it, all had co-chairs, male and female. But out of the research that was done about this, in the lead up to setting up this system, they found that the majority of people wanted a traditional Aboriginal system as much as possible, even allowing for differences among our own mob, you know, across the country. But they didn't. They said pointedly that the great majority said they didn't want democracy. Basically, they don't want anything like democracy, where an individual is in power. You see, not a group, not a, you know, 2 people, but and you vote for an individual. So they didn't want that. But some people did want it. So Aboriginal people handled it in a, I thought, very positive Aboriginal way. They said, well, if some of our people want democracy, we'll have it. We'll have a little bit. We'll have a little bit of democracy. So the Executive Council, it was decided that they would be voted in. That's about a dozen people. But again, half and half, male and female, and 2 co-chairs. So that's the only democracy in the whole system. It was, you know. It has since, as you may know, it's been wiped away, done away with by the government, because the government, you know, Australian governments always feel nervous about Aboriginal people running their own affairs. They don't like the idea, because what we started to do was, of course, run Aboriginal affairs. you know, this is an old system, you know, a society of great age, used to running their own system and running a country. So they just went back to that, you know, talking about what are called policies now, and so on and so on. And governments didn't like it, so they wiped that out of existence too, you know. But yeah, it's so it comes natural, you know, the idea of a gendered governance, that men and women are both responsible for the stability and security of systems. But you know, the Western system has been imposed all along, you know. Yeah, is that enough? I'm not quite sure.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Gil had his hand up.
Yeah, could I ask a question? I just have a sip of my wine before.
I'll have my water.
I'm just, well, you know, our conversation about democracy.
Oh, yes.
And constant fruitful disagreement that we have.
Fruitful disagreement.
So I wanted to go back to Ariel's point about the difference between what you call civilizational society, yes, as opposed to state. So I'm reminded of Benjamin Barber. I can only paraphrase him because I can't remember, but the idea that citizenship or civil getting together is hard work. In other words, it's more than just voting. It's hard work to develop a deliberative civil society. So that's making a distinction between governance as opposed to, you know, the notion of a government. So I guess the question I wanted to ask you, it seems to me when you talk about Aboriginal governance, you're talking about, I mean, it's more than just a deliberative structure, because the deliberation relies on each individual being connected to land. But
yes,
nonetheless,
right.
there's a deliberative structure that which includes trying to get gender balance, you know, elder and younger people structure. So is it true to say that when you talk about a civilization or a civil structure, you're talking about the emphasis being on the relationality between people as opposed to civilization just being about, you know, institutional structures, that kind of.
Yes,
so the emphasis being on the governance and the deliberation, and whatever might follow is another aspect, rather than the emphasis being on the hierarchical structure. Is that the kind of thing that you mean in that sense?
It's trying to sort out the two big, what I reckon are two big problematics in human society. How do you work out what the role of authority is? Because you can't have a society, human society, without some kind of an authority and power. And the other one is power. Most old ancient societies, they, and still now, of course, they conflate authority and power. And so if you've got power via some way over, you know, population, weapons, powerful armies, and so on, then you've got the authority to do whatever you like, have the kind of society that you want, structures, everything, you know, institutions and so on. But if sorry, I'm losing the track of my
authority and power, Mary.
Yeah, authority and power. Sorry. What, for all kinds of reasons, what Aboriginal people worked out, and remember, this has got a lot to do with the land itself, the fact of being an island continent too, an island continent that has never been invaded, actually, from outside. Practically every other continent in the world has had to deal with other different kinds of people coming through, being pushed by circumstances. A war going on here pushes people, makes people sort of flee. So they push in further, I forget what you call that. You keep pushing eastwards, westwards, northwards, whatever. But people are displaced over in some way, in large scale or small scale. Now, things like that never happened here. This is an island continent. The only connection is with Asian countries, which came backwards, back and forwards over time, nearly 2,000 years, actually, by the way. It only ended in early 1900s, like 1910 or something, because the Australian government had to take over from Aboriginal people from running the country, you know, so, but apart from that, plus there was no notion or concept of invasion within the country. They actually started out with the idea of a custodial ethic of trying to concentrating on what a friend of mine called a long-term experiment in human order making, basically. A long-term experiment in human order making, just like a gigantic lab. So that all they had to work out was how to get on with the land. You know, how do you treat the land? How do you think about the land? And how do you get on with each other, basically? So they worked that out. And it was the thing between authority and power that had to be worked out. What they did was quite unique. They separated authority and power. Whereas everyone else, for all kinds of necessary reasons, you know, to do with all those things I mentioned before, they decided to separate those things. So you've got to have power. You've got to have authority. And I call authority that it constitutes knowledgeable people. And knowledgeable people are, generally speaking, maybe older, more experienced people, but not necessarily exclusively people with white hair and grey hair and so on. You've got to have young people too, very smart, preferably good ego management, but young people who want to know things, want to learn things, and so on and so on. So a group of knowledgeable people who don't act like a hierarchy. They're not a hierarchy, they're there as as exemplars, but also they're minders too. They're minders of the history of the clans, they know about the protocols, they know about the rules, all the stories, and above all, they know everything there is to know about the land itself, you know, and so on. So they've been in these places for like tens of thousands of years. So they don't want to be anywhere else. Nobody wants to be anywhere else, so nobody invades other people, because one of the rules is not to invade, you see, you know. In fact, it's not even a rule, I would say. It's more like a psychology of life, if you like. It's not religious, it's not ideological, it just hasn't come up, actually. It's a concept. Invasion is like a foreign concept that came in only, you know, a few centuries ago. So
understanding a form of relationality in various levels.
In various levels, but also not seeing survivalism as an opposite. It's not an excluded middle idea, either relationality or survivalism. It's they are entangled, they are joined together, and you concentrate via this via the custodial ethic, stewardship idea, and so on, and activities, and so on. You know, you just simply keep working on that, and that's the relationalist ethos, as opposed to a survivalist ethos, not a survivalist ethos. Okay. Yeah. So, and the relationality minds, if you like, or takes care of the relationalist tendencies. Yeah. So it's not a perfection. It's not to do with pursuing moral philosophy or being good, because remember, this ancient system didn't have a god, no godlike, godhead character, nothing like that. Yeah. So no god, powerful ancestral beings, spirits, and so on, but nobody's in charge. No one of them is in charge of everything, and no heaven or hell. No competition in all aspects of thinking in that way, you know. It will rise, but the relationalism saves it from going too far.
Thank you for that. But we, on my way back from Kiama, and I see you on the Gold Coast, we could talk about why I think that's democracy.
Yes.
I'll leave it to someone else.
Yes. Well, if you're thinking of individuals, though, that's what that's distinctly what the people said. They don't like the idea, because when they experimented with it, see, the government of the day, some Aboriginal, forcing the idea of democracy on Aboriginal people, experimented with it. One go they had at it, and they could see it from our point of view, see some of the faults of it, and they just didn't want it again, because it relies on the individual. See, the individual, you know, you don't know that person. But also, the other thing is, we've got to have a system in a mass society, big mass society. And what I'm talking about, of course, is a small societies, you know, like the early Greeks, actually, too, you know, early Greeks. Yeah, they're small societies too. So it's a big difference, I think, with population difference, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like I said, ongoing discussion when I see
ongoing discussion, yes.
Okay, over to someone else. Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so anyone else? More questions, comments? Either for Mary or for Ariel? Okay, so we have Calvin, please go ahead.
Can I just ask you, Mary, about that last issue of population size? Can you see how the picture that you're painting can be scaled up?
Yeah, not fully. Although I have been very encouraged when I read about, you know, sortition. You know, the idea of sortition. That's an old Greek thing too, actually. That's what they liked, you know. So in times now, I've read about in the UK, not quite sure about the US and other places, who want to, because let's face it, millions and millions of people around the world are very disappointed by democracy, very disappointed. And so some people have made the move towards having smaller, like citizens' assemblies, going back to that, citizens' assembly, people's assemblies. So say, for example, in a suburb, some people would get together. And that's as I understand the modern day sortition movement, you know, they're just smaller groups who think that this idea of power always being in the hands of the state, you know, how to get some, at least some of that power back to real people on the ground or locality, strengthen the locality and so on. That's and I'm very, I thought that's great if people want to start doing that. And they are apparently, but it's not yet a big movement, you know. But also, I don't think the state would like it very much.
No,
I don't think so. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd ask anybody if you want to say something against it all or be critical of it, because I know there are some incredible things like, for example, if you've ever seen a Aboriginal language map, every square inch of the country is somebody's responsibility, see? And when I've heard, because I try and keep taking an interest in international relations too, at the Pulsus in the University of Queensland. So a modern movement is toward some countries and some thinkers and some peoples, different movements and so on, are very interested in the notion of multipolarity. Multilateralism, everybody's heard of multilateralism and so on, trying to get away from the idea of unipolarity, the idea of empires, because it is a pretty ancient thing, isn't it? It's nearly, it came up with the rise of agriculture, large agriculture. You end up with empires, they fight with each other and so on and so on. And it's gone on for like thousands of years, literally. So, and this is the end of it, what you see in the world today. So maybe it's time for empires, the very idea of empires or unipolarity, to retire from the scene, because they've become, after all this time, and maybe they always were, who knows, they're very inefficient. Inefficient for people on a large scale, inefficient for keeping stable, secure countries on a large scale. So, but when you know, going through writings like that, I sometimes think that they couldn't do any worse than look at Aboriginal people. I know this is a very long bow to stretch, very long, is that you could look at this country, the old country, and say, this, what you're looking at is multipolarity in one country. That's actually what it is. No, as we were saying before, no state, no empire, no gathering or groups of clan groups that dominate everybody else and fight. They do fight, but not in an invasive way. Yeah, the idea of having a global system like a multipolarity, it's not as crazy as it sounds, but it would be a very difficult birth, put it like that. Very, very difficult, because I think you know, hegemonic rule, they'll fight like mad, and of course they are doing that in international relations ideas, you know. So, but it can be done. It can be done. You can put down some things that would be, what are the capacities among human societies? What are their capacities for having something like multipolarity? So it's like multipolarity with Aboriginal characteristics. You could look at it like that. But try and make a list of the things, the capacities that would be required for it, you know. And one of the big things would be to look after land, because looking after land isn't just conservation. It's like saying that, well, in a funny kind of way, people don't know what ethics are actually. They learn it, and you learn it to pass it on by very wise people and so on, but they don't fully learn it by doing it, because ethics is a doing thing, and you have to learn it by doing something, as in looking after something physically outside of the self, you know. And that's when you get real real deep-seated knowledge because it's internalized, it's educated, and you know, young people being educated in it, and so on and so on. And that is what, you know, you really know fully what the nature of ethics could be, you know. And it's not, again, not just to be good, not pursuing moral philosophy. It's the idea of having a really, really efficient, rational, all the words that are never associated with Aboriginal people, efficient, rational, sustainable, of course, yes, grounded, all those things. That's the kind of society you could have, you know, if you start looking after. So you've got to have something that's internalized and in a roundabout way, then you start building up what kind of society you have. You start from the right foot, start on the right foot, you know. And it might be useful to know that there's no hell in the old Aboriginal thinking. There's no such thing as heaven or hell. I gathered when I fully understood what, you know, Christianity or monotheism or other religions are or were. Yes, in a way, you know, the idea of either or, you know, it's an imprisoning thing, really, that kind of thinking. It's imprisoning. It's not wrong in some respects, but it's not very good when it applies to societies and ways of running countries and so on and so on.
Mary, can I ask a question?
Yeah, look.
If going back to your conversation with Ariel, you raised the issue of beholding, which worked really so well with Ariel's notion of holding and holding labour. Would you be willing to say a little bit more about beholding? And my question is there a relation, or can you articulate the relationship between beholding and obligation, and specifically your work on the law of obligation?
Well, I guess I suppose that's actually what it is, the law of obligation. And when I say law, I mean, I don't know of anyone who actually uses that term around Aboriginal communities and so on and so on. They'll just use the word obligation. But obligation is a powerful thing. It's something that you have to do. The closest thing to it is duty, I suppose, to be dutiful, you know. So you have to obey it, you know, you have to, you can ignore it, you can reject it and so on, of course. But the whole idea is that you have to sort of really do it. And you can't just say, I agree with it. And it's a wonderful idea, isn't it? And I'll hold it up there as something to aim for, but you have to actually sort of do it. So the idea of it is something you have to hold all the time in your person, in selfhood, in personal selfhood, which is why the idea of, what do you call it, autonomy is a really important part of our relations with each other. Autonomous. We're all autonomous beings, yes, but the relating connection is to have autonomous regard. And that's kind of holding. You hold as an acceptable, not acceptable, as a general thing that the other person, or talk about individuals, groups, families, you know, and right up to states, actually, states with the small s, you hold this idea of autonomous regard towards others. And you're in the Aboriginal sense, you're expecting that to happen. You just expect that because people, we all come from our own countries, you see. So there's that idea, autonomous relationship. So to me, that's the closest thing to holding, as I know. And it is like the word behold, but you are inhabiting behold. You're inhabiting. It's like a space.
So your holding and beholding is actually, it's very gesture, but it's also a physical mode of stance in a way.
Of stance, that's exactly right, of stance.
So it's
a stance.
Taking up a position.
taking up a position and you hold that position, you recognize the other person as holding that position. And of course, with colonialism, you're hoping that the other person is holding that position too, you know, of course. But in the old system, you know that that exists, you know. So there is a stance, and then you proceed, you know, with whatever business you're about.
So I'm probably stretching it a little, but there's a kind of physicality to the ethical position there. Yeah,
absolutely. There's lots of different examples, but one I always think of is the end of World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles, I think, was taken up. But as that was taken up, I don't know if it was before or after, when they on the immediate kind of aftermath of their winning against Germany, you know, against what was it? The Ottoman Empire, I think. But anyway, that came after. The winners took their time in being really, really insulting towards the Germany, very cruel, insulting, you know, not just making fun, but humiliation. That is absolutely the other opposite of that autonomous regard. See? And in fact, they went out of their way to humiliate the Germans. And I know there are some Western historians who now say that that was part of the reason, it's a big part of the reason why World War II happened, because demagogues like Hitler took advantage of all of that because people were angry and so on. If they hadn't done that, I'm not saying it would have been different, but it may have been very different. But in the Aboriginal terms, they would never have done that. You couldn't do that, not with autonomous regard. You can't humiliate the enemy, even if somebody, because this autonomous regard is for between peoples and groups who don't even like each other, you know. You're not supposed to sort of, you don't have to like people to have to practice that autonomous regard. You have to.
Can I just clarify that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go first.
Ben has a question.
Ben, yeah.
Benjamin has a question.
Yeah, sorry, probably sounding like a broken record here, but how does, do you reckon autonomous regard could be useful in the context of gender politics?
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the idea. I mean, it's an accepted, it's a assumed thing, you see, in gender balance, gender governance. There has to be there. The men are not supposed to be there like resentful and all that. You know, you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to be see that as that's the normal state of affairs.
I'm thinking of the.
Now remember, they mightn't like each other though. Do you know what I mean? It's got nothing to do with. I always say, you know, it's nothing to do with we all join hands and be friendly and sing Kumbaya and all that. You don't. You might be throwing bricks at each other, but that autonomous regard still has to be there. Sorry, go on, look. Ariel?
No, it's okay. It's there's
sorry, go on.
There's a new man up there, Benjamin.
Yep. Benjamin, please go ahead.
Thanks, Gallo. Thanks, Ariel and Mary. That was really interesting. I really like this idea of an ontological compass. I think I might steal that. But my question I had for you, you were kind of just talking about it then, Mary, is where does sort of pluralism about values fit into this picture you're sketching? So it seems like if we take your commitments like seriously, that we're kind of ruling out a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about how we should live.
Well, no, the thing is, it's a logic also. Every different place, well, the way you could look at it is like this: is they don't have a logic like anything like Western logic. Aboriginal people, they do have a logic, believe it or not. You know, ancient people, you couldn't help but have a logic of their own, of course. So multiple places across the whole country. Every place has got its own dreaming story, you know, its own genesis, actually. Just imagine a whole big country with lots of countries, one big continent, I should say, with lots of countries. And there's not one genesis for the whole country. There's hundreds of them, you know. So a genesis is a law. So you've got hundreds of laws, and some of these things overlap. And then a law for a place is the truth for that place that arises out of a place. It's not like I think, therefore I am. It's I am located, therefore I am. Actually, that's what it is about. So no absolutist truth, no thinking along absolutist ways, you know. And of course, the truth for a place is the perspective of the whole of life from that place, the whole of existence actually from that place. So it works out all perspectives are valid and reasonable. All perspectives.
To add a footnote to that, Mary, in our conversation, we talked about the Zapatistas.
Yes, and I thought they
have this concept of a world in which many worlds fit. That's what
that's right. That's exactly, I didn't know that, see, but that's exactly along that line. Yeah. And of course, what it does, it's a good logic to have, because what it does, it suspends judgmentalism. That's what it's supposed to do. But you can't get rid of judgmentalism entirely, because people, human beings, Aboriginal people know, everybody knows, human beings are very vulnerable. You know, they have egos, they'll fight, they'll have enormous conflicts, you know. And if they didn't have conflicts, they'd invent something to have a conflict about. They're so ornery and contradictory, and so it's all very, you know, it's easy to suddenly start
talking about women as well as men.
Yes, of course. Yes, not only men. Yes, I think it's just a human thing. But there's that knowledge about it.
We've got a big argument coming up, Mary.
Yeah. Well, I think judgmentalism can be there, but this is why I like the what's her name? I always forget her name. The German Jewish girlfriend of
Ariel.
Yes, yes, Ariel. She talked about wrong thinking, from what I gather, wrong thinking. And she described that if you take this, she reckoned was a kind of relativism, extreme relativism. She called it nihilistic relativism. That's very dangerous. So all perspectives are valid and reasonable, okay, for social and political ordering, you know, suspending judgmentalism. If you have a custodial ethic or a stewardship system, you absolutely have to have a logic, like don't be so judgmental. It allows for conflict, some conflict, but don't go to the end to want to invade somebody or want to have, fascism, really. That's what extreme relativism is, you know. So you got to avoid that. Yeah. Well, so that's lots of different views. Sorry, look, I'll just say to Benjamin, is that all right?
Yeah, thanks. So I suppose the question,
it all comes down to how you act with each other. You see, how you behave, even if you disagree with what they say. Don't be dehumanizing them. See, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I suppose the question I would then have is, this seems compatible with liberalism.
Yes, yes.
Or the ideal of liberalism, for example.
Well, maybe the aim of it, it didn't quite get there, because, you know, with Aboriginal Affairs, say, for example, the liberal idea was, well, we've got to do things for these poor people. So we'll change policies, we'll do this, we'll do that. They'll bring in Aboriginal Affairs, you know, DAA. And it's quite true. People, hundreds or thousands of people got jobs out of it. Organisations started. Things appeared to be kind of turning for the good, didn't it? And it does, you know, it does seem like that. But of course, while they're doing that, they now control, after that, you know, this is in the 70s, I think, they controlled Aboriginal Affairs and Aboriginal people through Aboriginal Affairs. So while it's a tactic, you know, people who are used, countries or people's cultures who are used to having wars, tactics are very important. Aboriginal people, not being war-minded, are not very good at tactics in this way, but they're very good at long-term strategies. So, for example, you've heard about the tents on the front lawn, the old activist thing of Aboriginal people on the front lawn in front of Parliament House. I always thought, gee, that's a good tactic. But then, of course, the government comes back with a better tactic called Aboriginal Affairs. And it's liberalism.
Can I add a bit there? Because I think if you stay with your custodial ethic, which is an ecocentric ethic, in other words,
that's right, eco-based,
of the whole political conversation is about protecting the ecological process in which we are all embedded and embodied. All right.
Yes.
So if we stick with our ecocentric ethic, then the world in which many worlds fit is not liberalism. Liberalism is an anthropocentric code, politics, where you've got one human banging on against another human, you know, or one culture banging on again. And the other thing is the material basis of those two perspectives. In the material basis of the ethic of the Indigenous custodial framework, ecocentric, it is material, it is to do with earth preservation, protection, whereas the material basis of liberalism is Western capitalism. And the whole idea of the freedom is, when it's translated into materiality, it's translated into the dollar form. It's a false materiality. So I think it's a really interesting point, but it would make an interesting paper, I think, to spell out the distinction between the two forms of pluralism there.
That's right, because, you know, like, I'm glad you said it in that way, because while DAA, government departments of Aboriginal Affairs, brought in all these things that caused, you know, jobs, housing, everything, by the same token, they were still doing and continue to do extractive stuff. Do you know what I mean? So, and Aboriginal people are completely lost out, losing out and lied to and all that, you know? And it sort of, I'm not saying it doesn't matter that people are, they're compensated, but as little as possible, you know, too. But if people had known that, you know, a while ago, I don't know if they would have been so keen on Aboriginal affairs, because the same government that does that is the same government that allows, you know, big mining interests to take what they want, do what they want. Hey. So yeah, I agree with you, Ariel.
All right, so maybe we can go to Gil. Gil, you have a question, right?
Yeah, well, I just kind of wanted to add to that. It strikes me there, bouncing off what you and Ariel were talking about, and, you know, that kind of ecocentric or ecological self. And Mary, when you're talking about, you know, in Australia, we have, you know, 250 or something language groups. So you have sort of pluralistic universe, if you like. So it always strikes me that in that liberal notion, and if you go further back to the kind of Enlightenment logic, I guess, that the notion of when we look at critical thinking, for example, you know, when we're looking at the truth of arguments, or, you know, what's valid, and that it seems to me, now correct me if I'm wrong here, but in Aboriginal culture, the way you have to negotiate that is looking at the various different narratives. So you know, the stories, and I don't mean stories, myths, I mean, that tells you, like you said, the narrative has an obligation, ethic, or whatever it is. So to negotiate that, it's about, is it true then that that's where dialogue becomes important?
Oh, God, yes.
In developing an understanding on how you navigate, I guess, narratives, rather than trying to show that someone is wrong by proving X or Y.
A dialogical process.
So the logic becomes one of developing an understanding on how you can deliberate between narratives, but at the same time still meeting at the intersection and somehow developing an understanding. Is that kind of
that's kind of like what it is, that you can meet. So meetings can take place over time, you know. It might take quite some time, because people might, this is between Aboriginal people, but between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, like companies and so on and so on. Whereas sometimes the companies or the mining interest or whatever developer wants to get down to, as they'll say, brass tacks, you know, how much, you know, what's on the bottom line, and so on, without going through all of this other thing. They think of it as a waste of time, actually, you know, and you can tell by their language and how they talk, and, you know, and so on, or looking at their watches, you know, saying, well, we've only got time for this, or it's got some agreement, or whatever, has to be an outcome by a certain date or something, you know. So all of that is secondary, third importance, you know. The real thing is talking and talking and talking.
So by engaging with narratives, it's often seen as, well, a lot of liberals, you're wasting a lot of time by getting focus groups together rather than applying some universal principles. You know, but just one more question on that. It strikes me as, you know, we often have a distinction in where we look at beliefs, and you can act contrary to beliefs. So you've got actions and your beliefs. So you can say something like, I believe X, but never act in that way. But you can continue to say, I believe it. But it seems with your way of talking very much like a lot of the pragmatist talks. Instead of talking about beliefs, it's about belief habits. In other words, you can't really talk about a belief unless you also talk about your habits. And if your habits seem to contradict your beliefs, you're not really holding that belief. Otherwise, a belief just becomes some pie. So is that, in some
it's not a
senses,
belief.
when you talk about that, it's a similar thing? Or?
Well, I'd say that when blackfellas are talking, they're not talking about I believe in the dreaming. In fact, it's got nothing to do with faith. You don't have faith at all, because it's such a funny, dodgy kind of thing. You know, it's weak, it's strong, it's present, it's absent. You find it, you lose it. You know, so you wouldn't rely on something so unreliable. You know, you rely on what you can walk on. Actually, will the country be damaged by what you're going to be about? Will this place be looked after? Will real practical things, you know? And of course, what'll come into it is compensation. What will you do? We want to look after the place. We want our young people to get jobs. Blah blah blah. It's all very down to earth. That's what I mean by being rational and grounded and so on. You know. All that sort of thing. Okay. And of course, all of that too is relational, though, too. You know, more like a psychology of life, as I think we've talked about that before. You know, a bit like Buddhism, but with psychology of life with no Buddhist character at all. Maybe ancestors. They might say, well, you know, we've got to, you know, this is our ancestors' country here. You know, so we've got to do the same thing as we've got to look after the place according to how our ancestors have taught us or told us or something like that.
Okay, thanks for that, Mary.
Yeah.
Right, so any more questions, comments?
Well, if there's no more, I have a little one.
Of course, go ahead.
Aboriginal politics in Australia is tough and futile and heartbreaking and all that. And, we know what's wrong with the world. We know what's getting worse. We've got Indigenous peoples all over the world, every continent, every mountain range, every bioregion, and there are so many Indigenous peoples. What are your ideas, Mary, about moving forward with Indigenous peoples across the world to strengthen the political rationality that you already have here?
God, I don't know. I think it's every country for themselves, basically. They're Indigenous people. No, well, the Indigenous people in America, you know, both North and South and Central and all that, and various other places. I think the political systems in those countries, they really, really have to read the writing on the wall, like I was saying about multipolarity. You know, they really have to, because all these old peoples, they really do have something incredibly valuable, and not more greater and deeper than, that's the deepest, I suppose, is the looking after the land and so on, caring for it and so on. but design systems, co-designing systems. I'm not quite sure about co-designing, about coming to some kind of, what would you say, an agreement about having both systems, because there are some things that I just can't see lasting for a very long time. Do you know what I mean? Because what can you do about like, for example, agriculture. People are not going to sort of stop agriculture, or economics. You know, it's a global thing. I'm part of a group who are also talking about new economy, say the new economy, and there are there's a movement apparently where it's called steady state economics. You've heard the term steady state? I only understand it from a chemistry point of view, how it works, steady state in chemistry, you know, and so on. But when I was asked to have something opinion about something like that, you know, without knowing very much about economics, but it struck me that you want a steady state economy. Well, to me, it's logical to want to have, first of all, a steady state society. First of all, to be able to get and achieve a steady state economy. How do you do that? Yeah, you can't do it without looking at the society. And that means social and political ordering, a reordering of a system, you know, but that's a huge task, huge, you know. Yeah. It just seems like in what is called the free world, there are heaps and heaps of people, millions of people who are living on streets and absolutely abject poverty, you know, no good health, nothing at all. So, do you know what I mean? All that has to stop. They have to stop and start looking after people, have this custodial ethic towards looking after people. At least then you might start off on a idea of stability. Do you know what I mean? People have to have faith or confidence in the system that they're under or within, or, you know, abiding by, and so on. They have to have that. And if they don't, that's the beginning of the end.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of concepts like steady state economy, or the circular economy, or even the Green New Deal, which are being promoted. But as soon as they're out there, they get captured by the economic powers that be.
That's right.
And turn to service of the existing system.
Yes.
So it's a dance that is going to require enormous ingenuity on our part.
Yes, and I reckon courage too.
Yes, courage.
Big courage, you know, because I don't know, you go on forever talking about. You have to, somebody sooner or later, the West especially, and those certain groups in different countries, classes if you like, you're going to have to be poorer, actively choose to be poorer, you know. So I don't know. Anyway, I might have to go myself soon, if that's all right. Yeah.
All right. So then maybe with that we can bring the conversation to an end.
Oh, please carry on talking about. Yeah, but I might have to go. Is that okay?
Mary.
Okay. Thanks, love. Thank you very much.
Mary.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mary.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ariel.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. So do you want to keep going, guys, or we can conclude here, because it's already...
We have another meeting to go to, Guillermo, so yeah, gonna have to leave. Thank you so much.
See you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Guillermo.
Thank you. See you.